Good evening. Welcome to the April 3rd, 2012 Ashland School Committee meeting. On tonight's agenda, we are beginning our interviews with our finalists for the candidate for the position of superintendent. With us tonight is Dr. Barbara Malkas from Pittsfield. We're very happy to have you here.
Thank you.
The way it's going to work tonight is we're going to begin by giving our candidate an opportunity to make an opening statement. Then we have some questions from the board. And then we'll finish with your opportunity to make a closing statement. So with that, I will turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here and considered a finalist for the position of superintendent in Ashland. I know that you have my resume and can review my professional credentials for the position of superintendent. I do have a lot of experience, particularly in the areas of curriculum and instructional leadership, the area of professional development planning, and I think I have a lot to offer your district based on what I have seen through a very superficial review of the data that's in the public domain for the district, as well as based on my site visit today at the various schools. And I do want to thank the principals and their staff for accommodating me, as well as Barbara Duran, who did a great job making sure that I was on time throughout the day, so thank you. Philosophically, it's through education that students learn about democracy. It is really through being a literate and thoughtful, critically thinking adult that we're able to access the benefits of being in a democratic society. So the work of a school system is critical. It's the most important job, if you ask me, but I'm definitely biased, in really developing the future of our towns, our cities, our states, our country. And so the work that we do is not just about meeting a particular benchmark or achieving a certain level of score on an MCAS assessment or an advanced placement assessment. It's really about preparing for our future. I'm often reminded now that I've reached a certain age when I go into hospitals and I see former students of mine working there that yes, that generation will be taking care of us. And so we have to be able to provide them the skill set so that they can make good decisions and be able to obtain information and adapt to the information age and be able to make those good decisions on behalf of the legacy of the history of this country. So philosophically, that's where I feel education is one of the most important things that we have as a responsibility for school committee and for our cities and towns as we prepare that next generation.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So our first question comes from Pat.
First, I'd like to say welcome. Thank you for coming tonight, and I know you had a busy day today, but my first question pretty much goes into what you were just saying. If you're selected as superintendent for Ashland, could you describe what Ashland will look like 5 years from today?
Well, on several layers. There's not one answer to that question, there's several. I would love to be able to really be able to provide this school district a sense of a 5-year plan so that there are some strategic goals that are overarching goals and then have some measurable specific goals along the way to getting us there. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's a limited capacity to resources, so looking at how we might use resources so that we have a viable professional development plan that is really targeted to some data-based goals. Looking at how we can improve instruction when we now have new curriculum frameworks, evaluation model, new assessments coming. There's a lot of initiatives coming through the Race to the Top initiative, as well as from changes in state regulation, changes at the federal level with No Child Left Behind. So there's a lot that's coming our way. So learning how to prioritize that, or working with staff so that we can identify priority, so that we can use those truly as levers of change to improve instruction, raise the level of expectation in the curriculum for all students, and then also really look at, do we have the infrastructure to support a high quality education? So, you know, when we're looking at access to technology, whether we're looking at, you know, providing access through one-to-one initiatives, or looking at a bring your own device district, that requires a certain level of infrastructure that would support that. So, and thinking about that technology as an educational resource as opposed to an add-on. You know, we always did one-to-one textbooks. So we have textbooks in a one-to-one model. So now thinking about what's that next generation of educational resource that we're providing. So I think in 5 years, what I would hope that you would see is some, you know, increased, transparent, well-formulated and developed plans that kind of show where we are going and what we're going to hold ourselves accountable to in getting there, and then also some improvements within infrastructure so that the academically rich environment the students are coming from is supported when they go into the classroom, and they see that the level of value to education is held both within school and outside of school.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you're next.
Okay, I'm up. What do you believe is the single most important thing a superintendent can do to set the tone or climate for a school district?
The single most important, oh boy, that's a very good question. I, you know, would lean on research that supports this as well, but also my own experience, and that is having clearly defined goals and well-articulated goals that everyone understands, that they're clear, because that sets the expectation, and then provide the principals and you know, other administrators some autonomy. Hire the right people, make sure that they have some autonomy in achieving those targeted goals within their site-based setting. So I would say, you know, it's referred to as defined autonomy by Marzano and Waters. The non-negotiable goals from the district need to be well-defined and very clear, so that everyone is clear about the expectation. Mm-hmm. If I have to pick one.
Good job.
Lori?
You can list a few in the answer to my question if you want. And my question is, what are your top priorities for Ashland students?
Well, again, based on a superficial purview of the data, you know, Ashland's a good school district. They have good students who come from a community that values education. And so they are performing in ways that demonstrate that this is a good school district. So but that doesn't mean that Ashland would be exempt from continuous improvement, because the environment that these students are preparing for is always changing. So having a good school district at this moment in time doesn't necessarily mean that we are adequately preparing students for the future that they're going to enter into. And so having a lens of continuous improvement doesn't mean that you need to improve because you have something wrong. It means that you elect to improve because it's an opportunity to constantly be preparing students for what their future is going to look like. That's hard to do because we have cultural expectations around school. Right? We all went to school. we're doing okay, you know? And so we have cultural expectations of what school should look like and what is a good education. And so having to kind of break out of that paradigm, that box, and think about what could we afford to provide to students as that next level. That's the paradigm shift that happens in all districts that elect continuous school improvement. And so looking at, the various levels, there's always going to be, now with the new curriculum frameworks, there's definitely a shift in expectation. A lot of the standards that we used to see, particularly in mathematics, because I was on that panel, I can speak to that and say those standards, a lot of the standards that we had traditionally taught and topics that are traditionally taught at high school have now shifted into the middle school. Well, that means the expectation for mastery of certain skills is going to happen at the elementary level. So there's a huge shift there in what will be the viable content expectation for each grade level. So that's a great opportunity for us to have some very rich conversations around, well, what does that mean in terms of our curriculum? What does that mean for pedagogy? So are we improving instructional practice so that it is raising the level of rigor for those same standards? It doesn't mean more kids have to take, calculus. It means that more kids need to be able to demonstrate proficiency and mastery, even higher than proficiency, so that we are raising that level of rigor. Because the goal is literacy. The goal is being mathematically literate as a citizen in science, history, technology. So for students, changing the curriculum is going to feed a change in instruction. And that instruction then, in order for it to be meaningful, it has to have some relevance. It has to be related to something. Students need to see where I need this content. How is this content used outside the domain of school by real professionals in their various fields? That inherently leads to increased student engagement. So I think that students want to come to school. They want to do well, by and large. Right? Most students, that is the frame that they enter school with. And that we need to capitalize on that. And when I was at some of the younger grade schools during my day here, those students are engaged because they're ready to learn, they're hungry to learn. We need to make sure that we maintain that energy. And the way we would do that is really looking at how do we create a rigorous curriculum, provide teachers the support and the skills to teach that curriculum in ways that allow students to understand the relevance and therefore become engaged with their content in understanding how is this actually used.
Thank you.
Before I have the next question, but if I may, I'd just like to follow up on that just a little bit. Based on your experience, can you sort of give us a view of an example of how you've sold process improvement or this continuous improvement in education to your community, and what type of specific activities you've utilized to drive that improvement?
It would start with the previous question on those clearly defined goals. I mean, that's critical because that defines then the district improvement plan, and then having each school improvement plans related to that district improvement plan, and being very transparent in those goals. In my experience in the Pittsfield Public Schools, developed in collaboration with the superintendent and the administrative council, what we refer to as the Pittsfield Promise. And the Pittsfield Promise has as an overarching goal that all students will be prepared for post-secondary education without the need for remediation. And so from there are several benchmarks used throughout the system that would show that we are in fact creating the trajectory so that our end product, our graduate, is ready to enter into whatever post-secondary training they may be pursuing, again, without that need for mediation. And that was based off of data. We looked at our data in AccuPlacer, which is used collaboratively with Berkshire Community College. So we used data to define that overarching theme, and then we used data to define the benchmarks that would show a trajectory toward achieving that goal, and created a 5-year plan around that. And those benchmarks include, reading with proficiency by the end of grade 3. That's been adopted as a state benchmark under the Race to the Top. We actually were looking at that prior to the Race to the Top initiative. Writing by the end of grade 7, looking at writing as really being a critical communication and thinking skill associated with literacy. And then algebra readiness by grade 8. Because we, again, looking at data, students who were algebra ready by grade 8 were able to access math courses that prepared them to perform better on the AccuPlacer and on SAT data than those students who were not taking algebra in 8th grade. And so, there's some debate about that now in the state, because the new Common Core requires all students are algebra ready by grade 8 by fact of the standards, because you're going to be doing linear equations in mathematics in grade 8. Mm-hmm. So that has been kind of preempted by the new frameworks. So, the development of that long-term plan around this Pittsfield Promise, and then building back benchmark data for the 5 years so that that's embedded into the district improvement plan to get us to those target goals. And then each year, really measuring our progress against those benchmarks to determine, which would affect at every school in the district.
Thank you. All right. Based upon what you've, in your short time watching and walking around today and looking at the district, your knowledge of our administration's process of budget development, what are your particular skills, and how will you add to that process? In
development of budget?
Yes.
Currently, in the district that I serve in, my role is development of projected enrollments. I also manage $11 million in grants, which contribute substantially to the overall budget. And then I also am part of the development of the tiered system that we use. We use a 3-tier system in developing the budget based on some known liabilities. And that's developed collaboratively at the executive level within the district. So that's my experience. These have been difficult times, and difficult times for every district, and not just within the Commonwealth, but certainly, across the country. And so looking at issues around, what is our current enrollment? What do we expect? What are we projecting the enrollment to be? Sometimes not easy to do. Census data can be tricky around that. And then really using that and having a critical eye as to what are your needs, what are your strengths, and then how can we preserve what supports our strengths, and how do we mitigate our needs so that we're able to, and then prioritizing those needs within those tiers, which is what I saw when I attended the State of the Schools address, that in fact was the process. And ultimately, it is going to be the elected officials that need to make some critical decisions. So they need to have the information. Mm-hmm. So making sure that we're providing information, that we're very transparent in the information that we're providing, so that it's easily accessible, so that people can understand what we are identifying as strengths, that they can see why we're doing that. What we're identifying as needs. Well, why have we identified those as needs? Education is an expensive proposition, and we need to recognize that. And many times within the communities that we're living, you know, it's really finding that balance to what can the community bear versus how do we sustain a high quality education. And some things cost, you know, will cost money, you know, and that's a reality. But there are economies of scale that can be achieved within the district. A great example is really, you know, can we look within our current structure of time to carve out opportunities for teacher collaboration, which I believe has happened here with the professional learning communities. Can we do that also for administrators so that they're also having an opportunity for their own professional development and reflection and growth, accessing the expertise from each other? So there are some things that maybe we could identify that are within the scope of the current resources as well that will help to drive the district forward.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think this is actually a good segue for what you were just saying. Describe how you will improve the overall quality of our staff. And I'd like you to deal with, you know, include dealing with staff who are underperforming, and then how you would energize the staff who are just coasting, and then how do you also motivate and reward the exemplary staff? So,
well, we have this is a perfect opportunity now that we are all working with the new evaluation model that's coming through from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. I know that, like in my district, as here, there's joint labor management teams reviewing whether or not to adapt, or revise, and looking at what that system will look like locally. But the thing that is pivotal here is that we now have rubric language that describes what exemplary instruction looks like and exemplary practice. And so it becomes less subjective and it becomes more objective if you really target the language of that rubric. Now, that being said, there's a huge implication for providing training to the evaluators and training to the evaluated. So, you know, because the evaluators need to kind of use that tool and calibrate, if you will, using maybe some model lessons. You know, there are some release lessons through TIMS or through, you know, different websites. YouTube, TeacherTube has some examples of teaching. And so, you know, you need to have professional development for the principals, who will be largely responsible under this new evaluation framework to calibrate what they're doing. And then the teachers need to understand how to use that rubric as an opportunity to kind of really reflect on their own practice. I think that when they dive into the language of the rubric, just like when you dive into the language of the Common Core and you start unpacking those standards, you realize, oh, wait a minute, there is a shift in this curriculum and the expectation is at a much higher level than what we have traditionally taught, even under our previous frameworks. The same will happen using these rubrics. As teachers have the opportunity to take these rubrics apart and start to really understand the language of the rubrics, I think that they will come to the understanding that the expectation to be that exemplary is at a higher level than it is for, you know, what has been traditional in a lot of evaluation documentation. And so I think that this is the opportune time to really have teachers start to really understand what exemplary teaching looks like, what proficient teaching looks like, identify for themselves those areas where they are in need of improvement, because then they get to set their goals. They get to own this process. And I think that that's the approach that will actually use it as a means of improving instruction. If it's used as, here's the accountability measure, and you know, and no one can possibly be exemplary in any standard or domain or indicator, I think that that's not realistic. You know, Now, for teachers who are non-PTS status, the whole decision changed things for us. We do have to provide opportunity for teachers to understand that they're not meeting expectation, give them an opportunity to improve. And when they're not, they need to be exited from the system. And principals need to know that they have that authority and that they will have central office support in making those decisions. Ed Reform Act was very clear in 1993 that building principals are responsible for the staffing within their school, but they do need to know that they have a safety net. They have support to do that. For teachers with PTS status, the regs have changed. And so that is going to be the major shift around looking at what is the pathway of evaluation when you are a teacher with professional teacher status, you've not met the expectation, and now you go into a different pathway of evaluation than your peers who have demonstrated exemplary status. Again, provided opportunities for improvement, very clear opportunities for improvement. They need to have timelines, they need to have benchmarks. Again, there needs to be training around making that clear for the people doing the evaluation as well as the evaluated. But then now those teachers who are exemplary, who are being identified as really having a high level of competency using those rubrics, those become your teacher leaders. They're your mentors. Traditionally when mentoring first came in, it was whoever got the training, right? Then you were a mentor. Well, now we'd have an opportunity to say, no, this person is an exemplary teacher. This is a teacher who is really at the highest end of this spectrum. They should be the people who mentor the next generation of teachers coming up because they have the skill set to provide it. So I think we're in a perfect opportunity to really use the evaluation model as a lever of change. My fear is that most districts are going to jump in, get some level of implementation, and we will flatten out to compliance of implementation if we don't use it as a means of engaging teachers in conversation about what effective practice looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Discuss the differences in our administrative structure with that you are currently experiencing where you work now, and describe how you believe you would be able to add value to our current structure.
Well, I'm in a district of 6,000 students, 600 teaching staff, almost 1,000 staff. So there are more layers of central office support. For staff, we, instead of one director of curriculum and instruction, there are 4 currently, plus an ELL coordinator because of the changing demographics around ELL. So there's a curriculum office. There's 12 schools, so there's 12 principals. Many of them have support staff within their building, deans and vice principals and school and community coordinators at the elementary level. So there's more people doing more specific tasks. But there's also more students, so there's more demand. In a mid-sized district like Ashland, you have less staff, central office staff, to oversee all of those different domains. So people wear more hats. And so there's more tasks associated with any individual job description. So that would be the major difference I would see. Now, in terms of the cabinet level administrative structure that I'm currently in, there's a superintendent, deputy superintendent. I always say, if you see the language that says, and his or her designee to the superintendent, that's me. That's I get to sign everything and do all of those other tasks. We also have an assistant superintendent for business and finance, and we have an assistant superintendent for college and career readiness, who really oversees career and technical education as well as just all of the two high school domains around Mass Core and some of the Race to the Top initiatives. So here, in terms of an executive position, you have the superintendent. I would recommend wholeheartedly that you consider having an assistant, and not necessarily an assistant around curriculum instruction, because I feel I feel like I have a skill set that would be strong in that area, and that's what I would bring to the table. It's more around the operations component. Also, I think that any district needs to always have a second in command. Things happen. And so it's always good to know that there's somebody there who has the skill set, who's that has that ability to step in, even if it's just for a day. I think that's important. And in terms of central office administration, I think you have Director of Pupil Services, you have so you have sufficient staff there, and high quality staff that can really meet those needs. But I would recommend that there be some consideration for having somebody at that executive level to work in tandem with your superintendent around the operations side of the house.
Just to follow up, okay, budgetary reasons. Right. And so if we could not hire the assistant superintendent, how do you think you can transfer what you're doing now in Pittsfield, but even though maybe wearing more hats, make it fit for an Ashland?
Well, I think a lot of the duties that I currently am doing in my current role are in fact duties of your superintendent, because in the absence of that hierarchy of structure, a lot of those things would fall on the superintendent. In terms of being, I think I should rephrase my response to you is that I was not recommending that you consider a new hire in addition to your current staff, but a restructuring of your current staff to include really a recognition of that need around the operations component, as opposed to a new hire. Keep your current administrative FTEs, but think about maybe restructuring those so that you are in fact identifying and recognizing someone who would then have supervisory capacity over the operations side of the house.
Thank you.
Okay, Barbara, my question's a little more, less about the running of the business and maybe a little more about the students. I always think that there's a group of students that maybe we're not doing our best for. And so the question is that there's always a small percentage of students who don't qualify for special education, yet they struggle with attendance and work completion and overall school success. What is your vision for supporting these students and assuring their success in public education?
Well, I think the first thing that has to happen is we need to actually identify who these students are and look at the root cause. Because poor attendance is a symptom. Struggling academically may be a function of poor attendance. So, you have to look at, well, who are these students? What is their profile? Are these the students who, are we talking about secondary students? Are they at a younger grade level? In which case, is it really more of a structural issue? Maybe parents who are working and having to get students to school, and is there a need for maybe some before school care, transportation? What is the need? If it's secondary, it could be, well, who are these students? Are these the students who've always struggled academically, or is this a phenomena that is occurring in high school, maybe, as they enter into the upper grades? So you have to really identify who those students are, and then really look at the profile of those students and see, well, what are the common themes here? What are the common threads? In my experience in Pittsfield, as part of the work of the Dropout Prevention Committee, we did a similar analysis. And what we found was very interesting, that the students, there were different cohorts of students that were part of the at-risk for dropout group, looking at 9th grade. And those different cohorts of students had different reasons for being at risk for dropout. They all had poor attendance issues, but there was a variety of reasons. And the one that I found most interesting were the group of students who were actually very capable academically, but were not relating, were not connecting to the school environment. These were kids, by and large, who functioned much better with adults than they did with peers. They really disliked being in the regular high school setting, the larger high school setting. And working with Berkshire Community College, we created a model program. It's called the Positive Options Program, where those students attend their high school program at the Berkshire Community College campus. So we pay for the one staff member who kind of oversees their program. They do a lot of their coursework through virtual learning with some supports, and they have access to dual enrollment classes. And it's been wildly successful. And so that program really met the need of that particular student who was meeting that profile, which blew me away because I had this image of who the dropout was. And these were kids who, you know, had not passed MCAS, were, you know, giving up on school, if they had ever been engaged in school. And many of these students that I'm talking about had already passed MCAS, not only passed MCAS, but were proficient in advanced, but still were not attending school because they could not relate or feel connected to the school environment. So that's one example of how you create the program based on the student need, as opposed to creating a program that may sound really great and may look really great, but it may not target what the student need is. So in the absence of being able to really dive deep on the data and really create those profiles of who these students are, and working, you know, with the principals, you know, we need to tailor the program to meet the need.
Thank you.
Can I follow up, because I'm curious about that? And typically, if you have a group of children who aren't connected to the school, it seems like the typical response might be, what can we do to the school environment to help those kids get connected? It sounds like you went a different route, which is to change the environment altogether. And I'm curious as to how that came about. Did you think about it the other way?
There's actually, that was a separate cohort. There's the 9th grade cohort of students who had not yet taken MCAS, who were having poor attendance issues, who were not feeling connected. For them, we really worked around creating some after-school enrichment programs that would allow them an opportunity to feel connected to the school. And so we were identified for a 21st Century Learning Community Grant for our 2 high schools, and we targeted specifically that population, which was the 9th grade students who were not feeling connected at that point. The Positive Options Program is for juniors and seniors who are no longer attending school and have really, you know, the academic profile that they should be able to get enough credits to be able to graduate, but we're not attending enough school in order to meet the policy requirements for credit. So it was really about creating a continuum of services that you know, fit these very different populations. And it had to happen through accessing some community partners. The 21st Century Learning Community Grant forces you to identify community partners who are willing to provide those after-school enrichment activities. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we have quite the range. I mean, you know, from Zumba to, you know, we have an organization that provides training in outdoor activities, and they will be spending an overnight outdoors, in April. And some of these are students who've they've never experienced camping, and so this little group that is working on this together and planning for this trip, they now start to form friendships, and that becomes the connection. And you can't go to the enrichment activity unless you attend school.
I see.
So it's really looking at a continuum of services to target the various needs. At the younger level, with our attendance work that we've been doing, it's really some dynamite work from various principals on engaging students, making sure that students want to come to school. We had very, very poor attendance on any of the half-day in-service days, and so now every principal plans that to be their happening. And they're happening as a full school assembly, and they have videos where they, will showcase a particular grade. Maybe a grade is doing a performance. So those are kind of like rallies, if you will. But that has really led to increased attendance on those days, because the students wouldn't come in for a half day of school, but they will come in if they think there's going to be this opportunity for the rally and the happening, and then they get to see. They may miss their screenshot. They may, so it's providing incentives, that encourage that participation in school, and then that builds the capacity around, some positive behavior support celebrations.
Can I ask a follow-up also? And this is a topic that's interesting to a lot of us, but did you think about or do any training with the staff about how to identify, and I know there are lots of different cohorts, so it depends on which group we're talking about, but to identify these students, at an early point in time, before it gets to the point where they need an outside program, you've lost them, and had they been identified earlier and someone was concerned about them earlier, you wouldn't be talking about having to create all these new programs.
We did really a full year of just data analysis and data review and looking at those early indicators of success. One of them is third grade reading with proficiency. Students who are not reading with proficiency by third grade, who are now entering into that need for intervention and remediation over several years, becomes a risk factor. So getting kids to that proficiency benchmark, now that raises the status, and so that kind of tipped a level of professional development that for staff around, the early elementary grades. Ninth grade repeating ninth graders who have, either due to lack of attendance or poor grades, not been able to obtain sufficient credits to move to 10th grade. And I'm not talking about just attending summer school to make up a course. I'm talking about they've now got to repeat ninth grade. If they have to repeat ninth grade, their risk for dropout shoots up dramatically. So obviously ninth grade becomes a pivotal year. And so looking at, what are the risk factors before they're entering ninth grade? And so creating a summer program, it's called the Bridge Program for students transitioning from 8th grade into ninth grade, creating some courses. We actually adopted a course for credit called Strategies for Success in ninth grade, so that students are able to learn the skill set they need now that passing the course is high stakes, which they've not experienced really until they enter into high school, where if they fail a course, they're either going to summer school or they're taking it again. They've not really had that experience prior to high school by district policy. So really looking at that 8th grade transition, and then personally, I know I mentioned this today, my feeling is it's 7th grade. It's 7th grade that sets that trip. That's the pivotal year where you leave behind elementary and you're now getting ready. That's that year that switches to secondary. And I think that this is something that I've been thinking about, and I'm not quite sure yet what needs to happen there. outside of really creating a challenging curriculum that really engages students, that gets them excited about their learning so that they see themselves as academically successful. But that's something that I'm still reflecting on and thinking about. How do we really raise the bar for 7th grade so that they're already thinking of themselves as successful in high school, or capable of being, that they have the ability to be successful when they get to high school. And I think that 7th grade has a role to play in that.
Do you believe that if you lose them in 7th grade, can you get them back?
Oh, with tremendous effort. You know, the research indicates that for every 1 year of lower expectations and poor quality instruction, it takes 2 to 3 years to recover from that. And so, and the high school dynamic is difficult to do that in, because now you're not dealing with one teacher or a handful of teachers. You're dealing with a teacher for every content subject area with their expectations as well as their content expertise expectations. And so it becomes much more difficult, I think, as they move up. But it can be done, but it takes a tremendous effort to re-engage that student.
Thank you. And I think I'm next with my question, which is, what are your top priorities for staff and administration?
In what way?
In any way, like what do you think are the most important things to work with as far as staff and administration? What is important to you?
I understand now.
Yeah.
Curriculum. If we don't know what we're supposed to be teaching, it's a disservice to our students, and it's a disservice to the professional growth of our staff in understanding what this new curriculum is going to be about. And then I think the other things, and I know that this is being televised, and Carla Baer from the Department of Ed will disagree with me because she says the lever of change is the evaluation. I think you need to have the conversations about what we teach and how we teach it, and then use the evaluation model as a support to provide the example of what that high quality instruction should look like. But those two pieces coming in very quickly, those need to be coordinated well to really have an impact. Otherwise, we just get compliance, and we see no change based on these national standards and this new evaluation model that is a requirement under Race to the Top. These are big initiatives, lots of federal dollars and tax dollars being used to develop both of these initiatives. We have a responsibility to make sure that those become a priority.
Thank you.
That's a good segue then. Can you describe your current education contacts at the state level and how they might benefit us should you end up coming to Ashland?
Well, I was on both Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the Frameworks Revisioning Committee for Mathematics. I was in Phase 1 of the Revisioning Committee for Science. Science, we now have national standards as well, Next Generation Science. The state will be making a decision whether or not to adopt those standards and then form a committee to look at how those standards will then be adapted in terms of context for the Commonwealth with respect to our current frameworks. The frameworks for science were already revised. They are ready, but with now the Next Generation Science standards coming in, they're waiting to see what the interplay will be between those standards and then the expectation from the new frameworks at the state level. I believe very strongly that, and made this decision back in 2009 when they put out the request for people to voluntarily give up their time to be part of these committees, that it's really important to be at the table. Because I think you gain a perspective on what is the interplay of different factions between higher ed and state and federal guidelines and expectations, and so being at the table provides me that insider's view around the expectation. Now with PARC, the Partnership for the Assessment of College and Career Readiness, Readiness for College and Career, PARC, right? That will be an assessment system. And we're a priority state for PARC, so chances are, probably not this year, there may be some districts piloting components of the assessment, but certainly within the following year, that new assessment system will be coming through into all districts in the Commonwealth. And so, I've been very actively involved in making sure that I understand the expectations around that. Now, the interesting thing about that assessment system, it's being developed from the perspective of higher education around what are the skill sets of college and career, and then backward mapping in alignment with the Common Core. So that's going to be a math and literacy assessment, but it's from that perspective of college readiness, from the higher ed perspective. So that's going to change the way we think of these assessments and what these assessments might ultimately look like. It's really important to be involved so that we understand and know this information as it's being rolled out, as opposed to having it after the fact. And then, I'm not, my background is in chemistry. I was a chemistry teacher, science and math teacher, science and math curriculum coordinator. So that's an area of strength. I do rely on others who have expertise on the ELA literacy side. There is a progression in those standards as well that I expect will play out in what we will see ultimately in the assessment system. So, Jake Foster from, Director of Science and Technology and Engineering at the state level, I've invited him into my district to do professional development for me. We, participate in the Math Support Specialist Liaison Group meetings. Again, you need to get that information as it's unfolding. Because if you wait until it's published from the Department of Ed, you're already a year behind implementation.
Thank you.
I'm going to actually change my question because I think we've addressed what I was going to be asking about. And one thing I've noticed we haven't talked about, we've talked a lot about the more academic piece. And I'm wondering, I know you came to our State of the Schools, so you know that the emphasis on the whole child and all around the arts and all of that. And I'm wondering if you could just sort of talk about where you see that fitting, given limited resources and limited time in the school day and all of that. Can you give us a sense of where you feel about that?
Well, in my current contract, I have a line that says, any and all duties as deemed necessary. Mm-hmm. One of them became through attrition of a position over the last few years. We lost a fine and performing arts curriculum coordinator. Those duties came to me. And my only experience in fine and performing arts was that I was in a drum and bugle corps when I was a young girl. So, but I did not play an instrument. So that made it very interesting for me. The purpose of fine and performing arts is providing relevance. I talked about relevance causes engagement, and engagement is what may deal with, attendance issues. For some students, they come to school so that they'll be able to meet their friends who are in that theater group or that are in that chorus. That's where they have their opportunity, their skill set to shine. One of the things that I've done with the staff, the phenomenal staff in Pittsfield around fine and performing arts, is really linking the development of their curriculum to the academic curriculum. Having that curriculum really linked and supportive of the ELA and mathematics expectations developmentally over the grade spans. And in doing that, really identifying those skills, because the skills are what is transferable. It has helped both the performing arts teachers understand what the academic expectations are, but also has helped academic teachers see, well, wait a minute, that teacher is in fact teaching fractions, is in fact doing writing prompts as part of their music instruction, so that they're not seen as disparate things. I know that every district when they're faced with budgetary decisions, thinks about cutting the fine and performing arts. And we have to stop thinking of them as extras and as intrinsic part of the academic program that we provide. Now, does that mean if their enrollments are such that they're not able to maintain the program throughout, if we're seeing declining enrollments, there's economies of scale, but I think that we want to see that as part of the full academic program as opposed to the add-on, the extra, the nice to have. And so I think there are other places that we can think about being thrifty and preserve really what can create a, I always refer to that as the jewel within the school system. When you're looking at, surrounding towns and you're looking at what they can offer and there's viability of school choice, that can be a jewel that may in fact attract a high quality student to the district and certainly attract families to the district who say, they've made that investment in something that is important to us in a high quality educational environment. So I would be the last person to say, I think we should put that up on the board as something that would be part of our tiers, unless we were looking at an issue around enrollments in programs and therefore needed to retract, but I certainly wouldn't eliminate.
Okay, thank you. Before we do the closing, we have a little bit of time. Does anybody have follow-up questions?
Well, I think that was an excellent question because it sort of rounds out Dr. Malkas' experience, and Kathy and I did talk to several folks in the Pittsfield district that were really rallying about how you've taken care of the arts programs in your district, so that's a good answer. But I think your other question is important too, because while we've had the time to spend with you, I think for the community, I think this is an important question. So if you don't mind, I'll read it. Tell us what you've learned about our community in your short stay and your couple of visits, and why you feel that you would be the best fit to be our new superintendent.
Well, as I walk through the various buildings today, I'll do a mini strengths challenges. Strengths, you have really an amazing cadre of building leadership who are enthusiastic, who see their role as instructional leader of their buildings, who have a lot of creativity and ideas, and they're also very passionate about the work they do, which is really great to see. In the various schools, there's really great pride around the work that is being accomplished here. As I said earlier, this is a good school system. It's a good school system. There's a lot of great things happening here, and there's a lot of people who care very deeply about what happens here. In terms of, there's some things that I've already mentioned, certainly curriculum, new teacher evaluation framework. I think a need for really a plan that is using professional development that is strategic to improving curriculum and instruction. Those are skill sets that I would provide that are strengths of mine. And then I think that there's also needs to be a long-range plan and priorities set for really building infrastructure for a high-quality instructional environment. Both for technology purposes, but also general environment. So that I think that, we're sitting in this beautiful high school that is such a model, not just here in Ashland, but certainly, from what I understand from your principal, is a model that is, vetted throughout the state as other people look to develop state-of-the-art high school buildings. There are some older buildings. They were built at a time when we didn't have the needs that we have now for a 21st century education. And so that is something I think would need to be looked at, and something that I have a lot of experience with dealing with some of the building projects that are underway and need to be underway in Pittsfield as part of their feasibility process. So those are some skills that I think I would bring to the district and in areas of need that I've seen based on my site visit that I would say I have a skill set that I could address.
Okay. Anybody? Any additional follow-up? Well, then I want to thank you. These are, wonderful. It was a wonderful exchange. And now it's an opportunity for you to give a closing statement.
Well, I do want to thank the committee for this opportunity. Again, just as you are trying to match the right candidate to your community, the candidates that will come before you are, in fact, also looking at do I have a skill set that I can match to your strengths and needs. And so I do appreciate this opportunity, and I think that the bottom line question I always ask is, can I see myself here? And yeah, I could see myself here. You have as I said, a wonderful committed staff. You, as demonstrated by your interim superintendent, who stepped into the role really to maintain and help to stabilize your community and to keep the good work of the schools happening and moving forward. That says a lot about the district, that not only her willingness for her passion here in this district, but also for your support that you were providing to someone stepping into that role. And so that is something that I'm looking at and saying, that is refreshing, because it is not always typical. And so that speaks to the level of appreciation of education within this community. So again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And that concludes our school committee meeting for tonight. Good night.